Just a quick introduction to both of our guests. Brian Helgeland is the writer and director of Legend. As a screenwriter, he's written films such as Mystic River and LA Confidential. And as a writer-director, made films such as 42. He won an Oscar for his script for LA Confidential in the late 90s. Chris Lambrianu, one-time associate of Ronnie and Reggie Kray. Chris served 15 years of a life sentence, along with your brother, Tony. But Brian, when you were writing the film, researching the film, how much did you rely on the memories and the recollections of people such as Chris? And also beyond that, what other sources were you looking at?
Well, I looked at, there's many, 50 books, and that's probably underestimating it, written about the Krays, and a lot of them very poorly done, really, and some well done. And there's a whole tabloid history of the Krays that exists in newspapers over the years, and a lot of unreliable sources and things like that. But I devoured all of it, and then I met many people who knew the Krays, who were their contemporaries and primary sources, as they say. And I had never come across two people who hadn't been gone that long where the extremes were so great, as far as the good stories about them and the bad stories about them were so extreme, and the truth was very elusive in a way. And how I tried to approach it was almost forensically, and it was to get rid of the extremes on both ends, the good and the bad, and try to focus on the middle, and try to find where people agreed about things. And to be honest, when I first started, I was a little disheartened because I couldn't quite grasp them, and I couldn't get to the heart of Reggie, and I didn't quite know how to go about it because I knew I had to be with them. As a writer, they're my protagonists, and I had to be with them. And that's not to make excuses for them or apologize for them, but I had to be with them. If I was looking down on them, I don't need to spend all that time looking down on someone. And actually, when I spent the day with Chris, and I had always been trying to find out something about Frances and Reggie's wife. And Freddie Foreman, for example, who I met, I said to Freddie, "What about Frances?" And he said, "Well, you know, Frances was a pretty girl. Everyone had a pretty girl. Everyone had a pretty wife." That's all I remember about her. And I had met Barbara Windsor, and I had a very nice photo of her and Frances at a nightclub, sat together, and I showed it to her, and she remembered it, and I asked her about Frances, and she couldn't, you know, pleasant and fun to talk to, but we weren't friends, and we weren't confidants, and I can't remember anything about her, so it was always she to me was the ghost that haunted the Kray story in a way, and at the end of the day with Chris, we had gone to the Carpenter's Arms to have a pint at the end of the day, and it was closed, and it was cold, and it was twilight, and you were waiting for your ride to come, and I realized I hadn't asked Chris, and I said to Chris, well, "Can you tell me anything about Frances?" And he immediately said, "Frances is the reason we all went to prison." And I knew it had arrived, whatever it was, and he went on to explain how Reggie would always sort everything out, and any investigation, if someone in the neighborhood was seen talking to the police, it would get back to Reggie, and he'd go knock on the door and find out what was going on, and that when she died, he stopped doing that, and they could feel the police getting closer.
I saw the saddest man I've ever seen, walking away from the Carpenter's Arms. He didn't want anybody to walk with him, and he walked off into the night, and he just seemed to have the weight of the world upon his shoulders. And I think sometimes you can look at what you had and what you lost. And there's that saying, a man reaching up his hand to gather the stars sometimes tends to ignore the flowers that grow around his feet. And I think Reggie did that. And I think that squeezed the life out of it between them.
Looking back now, how would you say you got involved with the Krays? I mean, how did you get to know them?
Well, in the East End, you was either a boxer, a footballer, or a thief. And I wasn't that good at football. I could play, but I wasn't that good. And I wasn't that good at boxer. I had a go, I got a bit of bottle, but stayed around. But I was never going to make anything like a champion. So then I became a thief. You learn that in the East End. I mean, there was all the markets, and you went round, nicked a bit of fruit and something else like that, and in the end of the day, you know, you finished up in trouble, and it was like a university, and you learn, and then you moved on up to something else.
Could you just talk briefly about how your work with Tom Hardy to differentiate the two Krays, and was it always the intention that he would play both roles, or did that come later?
Sure. When I wrote the script, so I don't think of anyone when I'm writing the script as far as who should play a character or anything like that. But when it's all done, it's the reality comes, I have to cast this. And obviously, in movies with twins, there's a tradition of one Haley Mills in The Parent Trap, you know, the one actor playing both parts. And, you know, to some extent, two different actors playing. And I didn't have I knew both were options, and I knew they both had their limitations or pitfalls in a way. And because Reggie was the lead of the two brothers, I knew I needed to get Reggie first and go from there, and who knew if the actor playing Reggie even wanted to play both parts. But Tom was the first actor I went to. I had seen him in a film called Warrior that I thought, that to me seemed rougher around the edges, but that seemed to me a bit of a Reggie Kray character. And Tom had read the script and sat down, and all he wanted to talk about was Ron, and all I wanted to talk about was Reggie. And there's an old, I don't know if they have Reese's peanut butter cups here, but there's an ad in the States where one person's running with peanut butter and another's running with chocolate, and they slam into each other and they say, "You got chocolate on my peanut butter, no, you got peanut butter on my chocolate." And that was a little bit of the, you got Reggie on my Ron, basically. And at the end of the dinner, Tom said, "I'll give you Reggie if you give me Ron." And I said, "That's a deal." And we kind of held our breath and jumped in, knowing that we then had to make that go away, that Tom was playing both parts. And I mean, it was a very technical performance from him. It doesn't look it, but even to the point where his body double, when we shot over across his body double onto Reggie, his body double would have to learn Ron's physical movements before Tom did them. So Tom would have to work that out in his head, how he was going to physically react to another actor, teach another actor how to do it so that he could then copy what he had taught afterwards and things like that. So it's the discipline that I think was really good for the performance, was all the technical end of it.
The Krays learned nothing. I think they lived in darkness, to be honest with you. And how can you be a legend when three brothers die in prison? Because Reggie, in effect, really died in prison. I mean, they only let him out for a few days. So, no, to me, they could have been legends, but they became something else.